Welcome, welcome everybody. I'm Jen Anden, the program manager of the Master Gardener program at The Ohio State University. Thanks so much for tuning in today for the Master Gardener Volunteer Horticulture Happy Hour. I hope you all have a nice hot cup of tea or perhaps a glass of wine. I mean, it is 4 o'clock after all. Before I introduce one of my favorite speakers and friends, I'm going to go through a couple of housekeeping items for all of you. So the schedule registration, any available handouts and recordings are all housed at the highlighted URL here. I would highly suggest that you bookmark this page. We have about 4 years of videos that are housed here, so you can go back and watch those, and that all still counts for continuing education. And that's where all of our future registrations will be as well. So make sure you keep hold of that URL. Of course, you'll be eligible to receive 1 hour of continuing education for tuning in today or watching the recording. Our next horticulture webinar will be on November 8th at midday. We will have Carrie Brown from Fairfield County, and she will be discussing invasive plant ID and control. So be sure to check that out and get registered. Couple of friendly reminders. Please use the Q&A to pose any questions to Dr. Ann. That way they don't get lost in the chat. And then at the very end of the presentation, I will be launching a very short poll. It's literally like 6 questions and takes about 90 seconds. And I would certainly appreciate all of your responses. And it just helps us to ensure that our future webinars are up to par and great, and we have fantastic speakers and topics for you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce one of my very good friends, Dr. Ann Shannon. Ann received her bachelor's in horticulture from The Ohio State University, her master's in horticultural science from Texas A&M, and her PhD in horticulture and crop sciences from, again, The Ohio State University. She is currently the Ag and Natural Resource Extension educator in Lake County. She was previously in Lorain. She's worked for 12 years as a research assistant at the Ohio Agricultural Research and Development Center in the Hort and Crop Science Department. And a fun fact about Ann is that she likes to visit trees like they were relatives, because you know what? They don't talk politics, they can't be annoying, and they're always beautiful. So with that, I give you Dr. Ann Shannon. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad that you are joining me today. And we'll go ahead and hopefully get started with, hopefully you are seeing my screen. Jen, have we gone to full screen?
Not yet. You just need to start the slideshow.
There we go. Now it started. All right.
Beautiful.
So we're going to be talking about fall foliage, and we're going to be talking today about the science behind the beauty. So some of you may have heard me give a presentation about the beauty biology, color, and chemistry of flowers. Well, this is kind of the other end of that spectrum, but the same pigments actually happen to be involved. So we're going to talk about what is happening to the leaves. We're going to talk about unmasking the colors and what we're actually seeing. And then just to kind of broaden our horizons a bit, that fall color is not just for trees, but we're going to actually talk about a few shrubs and perennials as well. So kind of going back to some of those first things that we did when we were first learning about plants and trees, and we make that distinction between deciduous and evergreen. And it's interesting to note that while we think of evergreens as being trees that are generally found in areas that are somewhat drier, and we can see that they have a much smaller surface area, so they actually lose a lot less moisture. Deciduous trees are more typically found in both tropical, subtropical, and into temperate areas. And this is because with a deciduous plant, the leaves can be shed and you can stop losing water. So remember that leaf drop is essentially a drought avoidance mechanism, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. And in winter, it's actually a time of drought for plants. So the water becomes tied up as it is frozen, it's unavailable for uptake. And we know that the physiology of a tree also slows down tremendously as the temperatures get below 50. And so as plants are heading into autumn, the deciduous trees are bracing themselves to transition to dormancy to overcome and withstand the winter. So just kind of quickly, kind of going back over those parts of a tree. So here we have the blade of the leaf. And remember what a leaf is. A leaf is essentially a factory where they are manufacturing sugars. That's the function of a leaf. That midrib that transitions into the petiole, remember that this is all vascular tissue. And so that we've got the xylem and the phloem, and it's moving water into that leaf for photosynthesis, and it's moving sugars out of that leaf to feed other biological processes within the plant. And we actually can see that pretty clearly. So this happens to be a tree of heaven, which is not one of my favorite plants, but really clearly shows those vascular traces. And you can see those circular structures there. And so when we think about these plants and in this process, you know, what essentially is happening as we're moving into those colder winter days. So we have two things. So in autumn, the plants are responding to the length of the night as well as to temperature. So as those nights become longer, as those temperatures become colder, that triggers a response. So within that leaf, the reason that leaves are green, of course, is they're full of chlorophyll. That chlorophyll is continuously replaced during that evolutionary and during that biological process. Well, as it becomes cooler, that process slows down. That actually then triggers two different hormones. So ethylene, and ethylene you might be familiar with as the only one of our 5 plant hormones that is a gas. And ethylene is responsible for the ripening of fruit. It also has a very tight response to the leaf drop that we're going to see. And of course, the other hormone that's very important in this process is auxin. So we tend to think of auxins when we're thinking about plant rooting, but auxins have a tremendous impact on plant structure and also regulation. So as the chlorophyll begins to break down, auxins are not being created. That decrease in auxin then causes the phloem to collapse. This is what leads to that formation of that abscission layer. Now, what is that abscission layer? That abscission layer is a layer of cells, actually 2 layers of cells, that allow the plant to shed that leaf without leaving essentially an open wound. So remember that plants do not heal, they seal. And so what you're getting is that sealing. So you're not, once again, losing a lot of moisture. So for those of you who enjoy plants that are very neat and very clean, this would be a plant for you. So this is ginkgo. And this is one of the plants, there's one of the strongest responses to ethylene. A ginkgo can be in beautiful, absolutely peak fall color one day. And you think, oh, I'm going to go back to this tree. I'm going to visit this tree and take a picture of it when the sky is blue and the sun is out. And you come back as little as 12 hours or maybe 48 hours later from the first leaf drop, that plant will be completely leafless. So as that ethylene is released, triggers all of those leaves to pretty much fall at once. So if you like to clean up all of your leaves at one time, this is definitely a plant that falls into that category. And of course, the opposite of that, and some of you are familiar with the phenomenon of myrcescence. So myrcescence is what leads us to have that spooky kind of rattling sound as the wind blows through the oak trees on a cold autumn night. This is a phenomenon that we find typically in members of the Fagaceae family. So remember, that's going to be oaks, in beeches, very often found in young trees. So this phenomenon actually comes from the Latin word meaning to wither. And so the leaves do actually wither, but they remain on the tree. They don't actually form a strong abscission layer as occurs in many other tree species. Very often we see this more in young trees, but we do also see it as pictured here in this red oak. We can see it throughout the canopy, very often concentrated more towards the lower half of the canopy towards the center. That's where you'll actually hang on to leaves. And although we're not completely clear on why this happens, there's been research that leads us to believe that this is an anti-predation development. So the brown color that we see, we're going to talk about pigments here in just a moment, are full of tannins. Tannins are very bitter. And so it's thought by having those old dried leaves rattling around on the branches that it actually protects the twigs and stems from being predated upon, particularly by deer. So going back to, we're going to talk about pigments. So this is chemistry. So this is all about chemistry here. And chemistry can explain why the trees are actually going to be turning colors. The color in the leaves comes from pigments. And what are pigments? Pigments are chemicals that absorb certain wavelengths of light and reflect others. So to quote that eminent scholar, Kermit the Frog, it's not that easy being green. And as I have indicated, chlorophyll is the major pigment that plants have, probably to a tune of about 1,000 to 1, at least according to some authors. And chlorophyll comes in basically two different forms. There's chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Both are responsible for photosynthesis, and both are responsible for the production of sugars. And so while we have these chlorophyll pigments there, they're actually masking the presence of other pigments. And that chlorophyll, remember, is located in organelles called chloroplasts. And throughout that growing season, that chlorophyll is continually created and destroyed. Remember that we've got high intensity UV light, which can be very damaging, but the plant is producing these pigments in just vast quantities. But before we look at fall leaves, why don't we take a quick look at some summer leaves and summer leaf coloration, because you may be curious about what we're actually seeing in summer. So here's some leaves. So we've got a Norway maple at the top. We have a tulip tree in the middle. And when we look at these, in this case, what we're seeing is not the presence of a pigment, but actually the absence. So if we remember from our botany class, a leaf is composed of several layers. We have an epidermal layer, we have the mesophyll, which is the predominance of most of the area of the leaf. We have some palisade cells, and of course we have the vascular tissue. The L1, which is the epidermal layer, in this case has a mutation. So the variegated plants that we see are called a chimera. And a chimera simply means that you have two different cell types adjacent to each other. In this case, the first two plants that we're talking about are what we call a periclinal chimera. So think of it as hand and glove, so that one cell layer completely covers the other. And most commonly, we see the defect in the L1. So it means that that L1 layer, something went wrong. These cells are not photosynthetic. They're not making the chloroplast, they're not making the chlorophyll. That's what gives you the white to light yellow color. And typically the L1, because it's the epidermal, it's going to be the edges. This is why most of the variegated plants we see that have a very regular kind of edge are going to have the light color on the outside rather than the inside. And we're going to contrast this with, I couldn't help but put in a horse chestnut. Any of you who know me know that I spent a good part of my life working with buckeyes and horse chestnuts. And so we have a Japanese horse chestnut. And so this one is what we call a sectoral chimera. And you can kind of see that here in that we have different sections. So in this case, we don't have one layer completely covering the other. We have cell layers next to each other. This is what gives you that kind of speckled look in this particular leaf. It can also lead to the phenomenon that we see here, where essentially half of this leaf is non-photosynthetic and half of it is photosynthetic. Where the periclinal chimera tends to be very stable, we can reproduce it, we can get buds from these plants and propagate them and carry on a very consistent pattern. With the sectoral chimeras, we have to be very cautious that we don't get an all green branch, because that's going to outgrow the sectoral chimera very, very quickly. So just remember that when we're talking about a variegation, that this is going to mean it somewhere in that we've got cell types that are not producing pigments. Of course, the other thing that we typically see is going to be purple-leafed plants, right? And so they're tend to be very prized. The coloration here is due to anthocyanin. So we have a forest pansy, eastern redbud here, showing some beautiful purple color, as well as a purple-leafed European beech. When we have anthocyanin present, remember that it's not present alone. It actually is there in conjunction with chlorophyll. So particularly if we look closely at those beech leaves, we actually can see both the green as well as those purple pigments together. And so they're going to be we call that co-expressed throughout the growing season. And then as we move into autumn, that's when we begin to see some of the color change. So what happens? So in autumn, what we're seeing is an unmasking of other pigments. So these pigments are present within the plant throughout the growing season. They are just, because they're there in much lower concentrations, are not visible during the spring and summer seasons. So there's xanthophylls, and xanthophylls are yellow. We have carotenoids, those are carotenes. These are oranges and red pigments. We have anthocyanins, which are the reds and the purples, and we have tannins that are brown. When we think about these different kinds of pigments, they have important functions within the plant. The carotenes and xanthophylls actually work along with the chlorophyll to help regulate some of that UV light, so that it helps to mitigate some of that damage that can occur. In addition, when we think about carotenes and we think about the oranges and reds, we can think of lutein, which is actually we see that in eggs as well as in many different kinds of plants. That's going to be one of the bright yellows. But it's going to be as that chlorophyll is breaking down that we're able to see these other pigments. So here's that spectrum of the carotenoids. So starting with the bright yellows going to the red colors. So we have lutein, we have beta carotene. So the same pigment in sugar maple that we actually see in squashes and pumpkins and carrots. And then lycopene, which are the red pigments that we see in tomatoes and peppers and other things like that. So this is a broad palette of pigments. They're really predominantly not water soluble. So, you know, sometimes we hear, oh, the rain washes the color away. That's actually not true. It's simply the sunlight helps to enhance our experience of the colors. But just as with flower colors, plants are not expressing these colors for our benefit, but they're expressing them for their benefit. When we see an unmasking of the carotenoids, that's when we see the yellow and the poplar, the sycamore. Birches are ones that also have high quantities of carotenoids, hickories as well. It's interesting to note that the same process, so if we have a leaf that is damaged, or if we have a deficiency of water or nutrient or disease, and a leaf is being shut down, the yellowing that we see in the leaf are the carotenoids being expressed there as well. And that's a completely normal physiological function. And here are the anthocyanins. So a group of beautiful pigments, reds to purples to even to blues. So anthocyanins were actually named for the flowers in which they were first described in many instances. Anything from red orange to a deep blue that you would see in a delphinium. These pigments, actually, there are about 9,000 different pigments that are out there with different sugars, slightly different arrangements that are responsible for that range of colors. Anthocyanins are produced in response to stress. And so when a leaf is under stress and its sugar levels have increased and the temperatures decrease, that's when we see anthocyanin production go up. And that's when we see the red, unlike the carotenoids, which are present most of the time. And this is typically why the red is one of the last colors we see to appear before a tree will lose its leaves for the winter. It takes a while for those anthocyanin pigments to actually build up in the leaf. And while their precise role is still being researched, there's a lot of evidence to say that anthocyanins are being actively produced and intentionally, basically as a kind of a sunblock. And this is going to be the pigments that you see in red maple, in black cherry, in shumard, and in scarlet oak. So this is going to be anthocyanins that we're seeing. And then it brings us finally to tannins. So as I said, tannins are they're very large molecules, as you can see here. Typically, they're going to be in shades of brown. They are coming from that same pathway that led to the production of chlorophyll and carotenoids. These pigments have roles in interacting with enzymes and protein exudates to work to prevent infection. It's what gives tea its brown color. It's what gives bitter taste to persimmons as well. It's considered to be a common waste product, which is moved either into small structures within the plant cell itself called a vacuole, or into the cell walls. And this is actually what's responsible. Tannins, in addition to carotenoids, coming together is what gives that golden color, which we can see here for this American beech. So it's one of our most lovely combinations. But just as with nearly every trait that we look at in a plant, there is both a genetic and an environmental component to that. So different species of trees are going to be producing different amounts and various kinds of pigments. So not every species of tree has the ability, for example, to produce anthocyanins. Members of the Fabaceae or the bean family have very, very high concentrations of xanthophylls and luteins, which give them their bright golden color. And small genetic changes within a plant can lead to very different colors. Every tree producing different quantities of chemicals, and that's what I have pictured here. So I have two seedling Japanese maples here, both with the same parents. And you can see one is expressing more yellows and oranges, while the other one is definitely expressing more deeper reds and purples. And of course, the environment plays a huge role in all of this, as it does with most things related to horticulture. Bright, warm, sunny days and cool but not freezing nights lead to the best color. It also depends on what has happened during the previous growing season. So the healthier a leaf is going into fall, the more likely it is to be a vibrant color. So for example, if we have a prolonged drought, let's say in July and August, and the leaf is damaged and is scorched, that leaf is not going to be providing us that same effect that we would see if it was in good health. Fall weather is really, really affects that, as I said, that anthocyanin production. The brilliant reds are favored by photosynthesis. So even though the leaves are breaking down that chlorophyll, they're still producing some sugars. Those photosynthates are then available for anthocyanin production. So if we have cloudy, rainy weather near peak color, it will dim those bright colors. Everybody asks about the timing. And just like we try to figure out when trees are going to be blooming in spring, we try to figure out when are we going to see fall color. In some ways, it is more difficult to predict fall color than it is flowering, because flowering is very closely related to growing degree days. And hopefully all of you are familiar with our growing degree day calendar. And so we can take a look at the upcoming forecast and we can begin to kind of predict when we think flowering is going to be at peak, but it is much more difficult to do that. We don't have those same tools available to us to predict fall color. And so, as so often as we say in extension, it depends. Typically in Ohio, we see peak color sometime around mid-October, at least in the northern half of the state. Color begins with our earliest species as early as September. So for example, I have a buckeye here, and it was beginning to show fall color, that beautiful warm orange, on the 17th of September of last year. And how long can it extend? It can extend well into November. Some of our last species to color are going to be sweet gum, and here I have a Franklinia. So where we saw the yellow buckeye coming into fall color in September, here we have a Franklinia that's just beginning to reach fall color on the 14th of November of last year. And I looked at my Franklinia on Sunday when I was last home, and it was still completely green. It had not begun to color at all. And we can see that this plant will take on shades of gold and orange and some shades of purple as well. So let's take a look at some of the most beautiful of our fall color plants. So we'll start first with a yellow buckeye. So this is described as having a warm pumpkin orange color, and indeed it does. One of the best plants for orange fall color, as a matter of fact. Very large tree, so this is not one for a small space, but great to see in a park, and one to keep your eye out for if you see a tree with yellow-orange color. Take a close look and see if it might happen to be a yellow buckeye. Maples, of course, are the note for New England and indeed much of the Midwest as well. Here we see a red maple, true red maple, given we've got a three-pointed leaf, taking on that bright red, distinctive red color. In contrast here, we have a beautiful sugar maple, taking on shades of orange. Here's a tree absolutely almost at peak and perfect fall color. Japanese maples will also take on shades of orange, although we'll find examples here of beautiful shades of red depending on the cultivar we selected, but very soft, very delicate, very fine. And so these are leaves that tend to suffer a little bit, particularly if we have strong winds. And that's one of the other things that will affect how long our fall color will last. So very often you're said, well, peak might be the middle of October. Does it last a week? Some years it lasts a week, some years it lasts only a few days. This year, trees in northeastern Ohio were reaching peak long about the 20th or so of October. And by last Saturday, when we had some fairly strong winds and rain, I went from 70% canopy in my trees to about 30% in just a day or two. And so that gives you an idea of the effect of having that abscission layer. As soon as we had sufficient pressure, those leaves became disattached from the trees. A tree for all seasons, and hopefully all of you know this tree. This is paper bark maple, so known for its beautiful bark, its beautiful copper bark, beautiful dark green leaves in summer, but also takes on this beautiful orange to red fall color. Can just be absolutely spectacular. Here's one that's showing some interesting fall color. So typically we think of white ash as being yellow, and most years it is. This year, we happened to find this specimen on the Mansfield campus. We were down working on an Ohio trees book, and here we've got a white ash that's actually taken on brilliant shades of purple, and just thought it was quite beautiful. And so I thought I'd capture that and share that with all of you, knowing that we were going to be talking about unusual fall colors here today. Flowering dogwood. So some genera tend to be more colorful than others. Dogwoods tend to have shades of red in their palette. So we can see here we've got a flowering dogwood just about at peak with its red flowers or its red leaves, and note the flower buds for next year are all present here. And here is a Coosa dogwood. Also showing that brilliant red color. Leaves, of course, are a little bit different in shape than with Ohio, or we're not with Ohio, but with flowering. But once again, that striking red color, particularly against, in this case, a light colored building and a blue background. A tree, a beautiful native tree that hopefully some of you are aware of. This is tends to be a plant that favors a wetter and more acidic site. And this is, it goes by many common names, one of them being black gum. You might know it as sourwood or pepper ridge. But beautiful shiny green leaves throughout the summer that turn to this brilliant scarlet in the fall. Well, again, in one of our trees that colors early, and you can actually see that here as the tree is nearly at peak and the surrounding maples are still just now beginning to turn. Here is a thornless honey locust. So this is Fabaceae. This tree, when I saw it just a couple of weeks ago, was literally beaming, so much so that I actually had to pull off the road, pull into the parking lot that you see here, and take its picture because I thought it was simply spectacular. And just like when we think of spring, of a plant having one day when it is definitely at peak bloom, we definitely have days when trees are at peak fall color, and that's what you're seeing here as the expression of that lutein and those xanthophylls giving that brilliant yellow color. Another plant in that same family is American yellowwood. And if you don't know American yellowwood, I would definitely encourage you to look this plant up. This one happens to be at the Kingwood Center in Mansfield, and kind of an intermediate sized tree. In addition to having beautiful chains of white flowers in May and June, it has this spectacular yellow fall color. Just gorgeous. And the last one of this particular family that I'm going to highlight today is Kentucky coffee tree. Perhaps maybe not as brilliantly yellow as the other two, but definitely shades of yellow. You can definitely see the similarities in leaf structure and definitely in tone as well. Serviceberry. So this is a interspecific hybrid. This is probably grandiflora, which is a hybrid between canadensis and not Libra. I'll think of it in just a second. So it's going to give you sort of that intermediate small tree to large shrub, depending on how you have it pruned. And the cross is between arborescens and laevis, selected for its orange and reddish fall tones. Another one that's got beautiful color in spring, so it will give you flowers in April, fruit in June, and this gorgeous orange to red fall color in October. Sassafras, another outstanding plant. This is another plant that I drove past it for several days and finally had to pull in and see what all the color was about. This is another one of our natives. It turns shades of gold to orange, as we see here, and then we'll definitely take on shades of red and purple if the weather permits. The crushed twigs give you kind of that sassafras root beer kind of smell. It will produce multiple stems, as we see here, but definitely a beautiful tree, especially if you keep it pruned up, giving you all of that gorgeous color. The best of the oaks is probably scarlet oak, so Quercus coccinea. Plants that will take on absolutely beautiful red tones. As I said, the red here is coming from anthocyanins. Occasionally we will see russet to red tones in northern red oak. Northern red oak actually gets its name from the coloration that we actually see in the twigs and in the xylem tissue as opposed to the leaf tissue, but in good years, it will actually take on some reddish tones. But for the most part, what we find in oaks is they go from green to kind of a yellowish green to brown. So they have high quantities of tannins. And it's actually the tannins that are prized for many of the properties for oak. But as I said, this one actually is the one that's probably got the best of the fall color. And here we have Zelkova. So originally I was going to title this talk From Acer to Zelkova and the colors in between. But then I decided I would actually include some shrubs and other things. So we'll conclude our trees here with Zelkova. Definitely taking on those shades of orange. You definitely can see that the carotenoids are being well expressed. And this small to medium-sized tree that's actually a very good tree for city and urban plantings. Ginkgo. So now we have moved out of our classic flowering trees and into our plants that are in the conifer side of things. known for its beautiful fan-shaped leaves, of course, but taking on absolutely phenomenal shades of yellow. So sometimes this is called the maidenhair tree, but that distinctive yellow actually comes from the xanthophylls and some of the luteins and the carotenoids. And as I said, this is the one that is a very neat and tidy tree, and then it drops all of its leaves at one time. And then two of probably our most beautiful conifers that express fall color. American larch will change to a beautiful golden yellow in the fall, and you can see the difference that if I've been able to take this picture on a day that we had a blue sky and sunshine, you can see just how bright that tree actually might be as I got up close to take closer shots of the needles expressing fall color. So beautiful golden yellows. And then common bald cypress. So these take on beautiful russet tones, shades of rust and orange, beginning to color, actually coloring now, and will be in color for probably about the next week or two, depending on where you are. Another plant that can take an urban site or a wet soil, and just kind of with a beautiful addition of having that fall color. Very large tree, so one that we definitely need to give it enough space. But trees are not the only things with fall color. Vernal witch hazels, so these are the witch hazels that bloom in spring. Will take on shades first of yellow, but you can see here that we pick up shades of oranges and reds. Fragrant winter hazel, this is a wonderful shrub. If you're not familiar with it, I would encourage you to look it up, as it has gorgeous fragrance and blooms early in spring before it leaves out. But then those leaves become just a stunning shade of yellow. Fothergilla gardeni. So if you need a small plant for a hedge, if you need a plant for a punch of color, this is a great plant. Blooms and has interesting flowers and blooms in April, May, and only gets about 2 to 4 feet tall, the dwarf form here. But you can see just how outstanding that fall color is. Once again, these are pictures that I took at Kingwood of plants just this past weekend. And this is the large Fothergilla. So if you need something that's going to be taller, let's say in that 4 to 5 foot range, blooming once again in May. And I took these pictures just a couple of days ago, as a matter of fact, outside a building near campus. And you see that expressions of those oranges, and also beginning to pick up some of those shades of red. So that beautiful multicolored palette of Fothergilla. So the witch hazel, the winter hazel, and both of the Fothergillas are all in the Hamamelaceae family. And it's a family that's well known for its outstanding fall colors. Here is Catinus. And so the Catinus that actually takes on the best fall color of the Congregrias are going to be the green leafed types. So the purple leaf types, velvet cloak being one of them. Those purple ones, they don't tend to color quite as well as the green leaf types, but definitely taking on shades of orange. And so this is going to be an intermediate to large shrub with fall color. One of my favorites is summer sweet. So not only is it a native and favored by pollinators, blooming in July when few other shrubs are in bloom, but those beautiful shiny green leaves take on gorgeous shades of gold come autumn. So this is another plant with multi-season interest. And Virginia sweetspire. If you are looking for an alternative to burning bush, I would put this plant hands down up against burning bush any day. So it will take a somewhat wet site. It will take shade, although it doesn't color quite as well as in shade as it does here in full sun. We can take out, you can see how it's taken on those brilliant shades of red to purple. As I said, every bit as beautiful as burning bush, and it is one of our natives. Hydrangea quercifolia. So another one of our summer bloomers, has that interesting oak leaf. And of course, we know that it's got that exfoliating bark for winter interest, but you can see here the pictures I just took on Sunday of the oak leaf hydrangea just coming into the height of its fall color with shades of purple and red, as well as some green leaves there. And finally, I could not leave out bottlebrush buckeye. So another large shrub. When its leaves first emerge in spring, it's got that bronze color because it's got some anthocyanins in it. Those leaves become brilliant green throughout most of the growing season, and then it turns to that beautiful clear gold come autumn. It's another plant with lots and lots of beautiful multi-season interest. But they're not the only ones. So we do actually have a few perennials that are also going to be expressing fall color. So here is hardy plumbago. And so we'll take on shades of red while still having flowers of blue. So it kind of gives you a whole range of tones of color. Its leaves, as they begin to tie back, as I said, will take on shades of purple, red, a little bit of orange. And this is particularly true, once again, if the plants are receiving more sun. So if they're in a partial sun situation. This is bloody geranium, taking its name from the brilliant color that it actually takes on with its leaves. And actually its Latin name is indicative of that. So sanguineum, meaning blood red, kind of gives you that kind of mound, kind of gives you that almost tropical feel with those palmately compounded leaves with shades of red orange to blood red, depending on the variety that you've selected. Probably one of the most beautiful of the yellows is going to be the Asomia. And so this is going to be gives you lots of movement in the garden in shades of gold and brown. And if you contrast that as pictured here with some asters, really kind of setting off the blue of the asters with the gold of the fall color. Barrenwort is another one that's going to give you some fall color. So, you know, it's mostly known for its tolerance to dry shade. But this plant will also, in addition to giving you that nice summer foliage, will give you those shades of oranges to russets to reds, and arguably some of the best fall color of any of the perennials. And finally, we will end with a grass. And so this is prairie wind. This is one of the little blue stems, taking on shades of red and purple. I wanted to make sure that I actually left enough time for some questions here at the end. So I think I probably have about 5 or 6 minutes for questions this afternoon. So if we have questions for anybody, there are some wonderful resources out there. So if you want to learn more about autumn leaf pigments, I would strongly encourage you to look up both of these. So the one is from Purdue, and the other one is just a wonderful thing that talks about all of the pigments and goes into a lot more detail about the structures and the wavelengths that they either reflect or absorb. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anne. Before we launch into questions, I'm just going to pop up our poll really quick. Again, if you could just take maybe 60 to 90 seconds to respond, I'd really appreciate it. You'll just answer each question, scroll down, and at the very bottom, click submit. So thank you in advance for doing that for me. All right. And you are so brilliant. Every detail that comes out of your mouth just amazes me.
And here, you know, when you look at what I've got up here, to me, that's not work to be done in the yard. That's just an absolutely beautiful carpet to be enjoyed.
I'll take it. All right, well, while we are allowing folks to finish up the poll, Dawn asks, are all variegated leaves the result of the chimera effect? Can't some variegation just be the absence of pigment?
So it is actually, you are correct. It is the absence of pigment, but it's going to be pigment in one of those plant cell layers, whether it's going to be that epidermal layer that is lacking pigment, or maybe it's the L2, but most commonly, as I said, we tend to see particularly in our woody plants, the variegation at the edge. And there's a good reason for that. So plants rely on photosynthesis to drive their biology. And so if they have reduced photosynthesis, they're going to be less vigorous. And so evolutionarily, we can see that there would be a selection against plants that are going to have large amounts of tissue that are lacking that chlorophyll.
Excellent question.
Absolutely.
Okay. Deborah asks, does the particular shade shown by the anthocyanins have anything to do with the pH of the leaf?
Very good. So you are correct that anthocyanins actually change their conformation based on pH, and particularly for things like sourwood and some of our other acid-loving plants, blueberries would fall into this category as well. That with a more acidic soil, those anthocyanins are going to take the conformation that is going to be more red. A soil pH that is more neutral is going to give you pigments that are going to be more to the purple and the blue.
Okay, so going along with that note, Deb asks, are the anthocyanins responsible for the color of hydrangea flowers?
They are.
Very good. Okay, Jane asks, how do I tell the difference between bald cypress and dawn redwood?
Oh, very easy. So you want to be looking at where the leaf structure is attached. So just like we look at opposite and alternate when we're looking at broadleaves, in this case, we're going to be looking at opposite and alternate where those leaf structures are attached. Bald cypress are alternate, whereas dawn redwood are opposite. I didn't have a good picture to include, I wish I did, of dawn redwood. Dawn redwoods will take on almost a salmon color, and then that salmon color will darken to, again, bronzes before those leaves size off, but I didn't have a good picture of that to share, fortunately.
No problem. Victoria says, thank you so very much, Anne. I learned so much from this hour in your presentation. Excellent pictures and easy to understand explanations. And we have several notes in the chat box. This was a great class. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Thanks, Anne. Great informative class. Tremendous. Thank you very much. Always learn something new. Very interesting information I've never heard before. Love this talk. I think you were a hit. Excellent presentation and pictures. Thank you so much for your time and preparation. Thank you. Great information. One more question has popped in. We are okay on time, as long as Anne is okay on time.
Yep, on time.
Perfect. Pamela says that they have a river birch that has had half of the tree with leaves that withered in the middle of the summer. The other half of the leaves were fine. And that was all she says. So any thoughts on why that might be?
So depending on so very often river birch will be multi-stemmed. And so I would want to trace that back to see if it was one stem of several that was showing withered leaves, or whether it was a part of, if we have one trunk, maybe one side was showing withered leaves and the other side was showing normal leaves. I would definitely be looking to see if there's any kind of vascular damage, whether that's from a lawnmower, a weed whacker, anything that disrupts the vascular system. And remember, plants have their vascular tissue on the outside. That damage, when water cannot move up and sugars cannot move down, is going to cause those leaves to become withered. And in fact, this is why if we occasionally we will see a maple, and maples are kind of notorious for this, in July or August, and the upper portion of the crown will begin to show what we would call fall color. And remember, that's not fall color. The plant has decided that those leaves cannot be supported. It cannot move sufficient water to those leaves. Those leaves are shutting down, and that shutdown process, we're seeing the revealing of those pigments.
Interesting. She has also added that above the ground wasn't a problem, but she was digging in hostas next to the tree. Perhaps she hit some roots.
Could be. Remember that with a tree, so when we have the trunk, and then we have that transition to the root flare, and then from the root flare we go out into the root system. If there was damage to that root flare, then that would, that damaged vascular tissue might be the cause.
Darn hostas. Okay. All right. Well, I think that is it on the questions. Couple more excellent talks. Wonderful, very informative. Thank you. I thank you very much, Anne, for sharing your time with us and expertise. You always do a fabulous job. We love having you here. And Master Gardeners and fellow gardeners, thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to get registered for our next webinar on the 8th, which is going to be on invasive weeds and control. And with that, I will bid you adieu. Have a great weekend. Stay warm out there and go Bucks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.